All right, looking at the defense, gave up a touchdown early, shut it down after that. Indiana is the biggest disappointment in the Big Ten. The offense has just come apart. Michael Penix got hurt a long time ago, so they're off the rails, but still great defensive performance. And the performance against Michigan State up until mid-third quarter, first 35 minutes of the game or so, 14 points, reasonable. Then they got shredded after that. So defensive adjustments in this game against Indiana.
Yeah, there were some glaring issues on defense against Michigan State, as you mentioned, one of them being 2 substitution penalties and 2 of their touchdowns when you probably wish you got a substitution penalty instead of them walking into the end zone or breaking a big run where Michigan's running on late after Michigan State's hurrying up. They're substituting, which is just an absolute no-no when the other team doesn't sub, and you don't get time to bring your guys on the field. Michigan wasn't set on 2 of those touchdowns and some other plays in that game. Jim Harbaugh said they'd get it cleaned up. Every player said they got it cleaned up in practice, and they did. I mean, they did. Indiana wasn't trying to go super quick. It seemed like their strategy, at least early, was to kind of use as much clock as possible. So a different strategy there than Michigan State was employing, but Michigan was staying in their personnel packages when they could and subbing when they could as well, of course. But if the other team doesn't bring guys on and you don't have time to bring your guys on, you can't sub. So Michigan bringing in Michael Barrett, a guy who we haven't seen a ton of. I think he was banged up a little bit earlier on in the season, but he moved to middle linebacker this year because they got rid of that Viper spot once Don Brown left. Now he's playing nickel. It looks a little slimmed down to me as well than even he was a few weeks ago. And he was a guy Jim Harbaugh said that they wanted to bring in that spot so they could keep some personnel on the field and not always sub depending on down and distance situations and things like that. And he played pretty well. I thought he fared well. He moved around well for a guy who was playing middle linebacker 4 or 5 weeks ago and has kind of transformed a little bit. So that's something to watch. His emergence. Daxton Hill, who's been in the nickel and so good at it all season long, was playing a little bit more at the free safety spot. And that leads me to another thing where against Michigan State, man, some of the angles the safeties took were just terrible on Kenneth Walker. They admitted as much last week, keeping plays in front of them. They're able, they allowed too many big plays. And, the number one job as a safety is keep everything in front, especially if you're the free safety back there. They allowed 6 plays of 20 or more yards against the Spartans, just 1 of 20 yards against Indiana, and it was on a scramble, or 1 over 20 yards, and it was on a scramble play anyway, so I wouldn't necessarily chalk that up to just the safeties or, something like that. So did a much better job, you mentioned, against a bad Indiana offense that was averaging 22 points a game coming in, which is, 100 and whatever in the country. But there were still some things that Michigan, you could tell they were working on throughout the week and were able to get it done. So positive step, because when you're playing a good offense like Penn State is, when you're playing a really good passing offense like Maryland is, and obviously an incredible offense like Ohio State is here in these final 3 games, you're going to have to be much, much better than you were allowing a ton of big plays against Michigan State. So it was a positive sign, I think, for Michigan.
Clayton Sayfie joining us from the Wolverine. Check his work out there as well as the rest of the staff at thewolverine.com. Penn State pick'em game on the road. Penn State got back on track with a 17-point win against Maryland, but tougher than the score would indicate. 14 all game in the fourth quarter. Your thoughts about the Nittany Lions, the matchup? What is going to stand out to you in regards to what you're looking for at Penn State?
Yeah, I mean, this is a Penn State team that probably better than their record, especially playing at home. They play Michigan tough there all the time. I think Michigan fans were relieved to get a noon game there. They've been on the receiving end of one of those whiteouts each of the last, I think, 3 times they played there. Went 1-2 in those games, 0-2 when those games were primetime night games. So people are a little bit scarred from that. You remember the tight game in 2019, the Ronnie Bell drop at the end. But yeah, I think this is a matchup that could go either way. I think Pick'em is exactly right. I don't think either team really deserves to be favored. I think Penn State opened at -1 from what I saw. Michigan's going to have a tough time moving the ball against this really good Penn State defense that has some big-time playmakers in the secondary. And then Penn State, Sean Clifford, man, now that he's healthy again, he looks like he's playing really good football. They've struggled to run the ball and stop the run this season, though. So at times you saw it against Illinois, especially. So that's going to be something to watch. Can Michigan get healthy is going to be a huge storyline, as we talked about earlier. But yeah, I'm excited for this game. Not quite as, big of a game for national implications and all that, but it's a huge game for Michigan. They've struggled at Penn State, and nobody around here has taken this game lightly at all.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Penn State has pretty much disdained the run, and so I would figure that Michigan's just going to tackle ball carriers on the way to the quarterback. If they hand it off, just tackle the ball carrier if he gets the ball. Otherwise, Sean Clifford has become the offense, and of course, Jahan Dotson is one of the very best in the country. 242 receiving, a Penn State record last week against the Terps.